everybody. Welcome to the OnStage Blog Podcast. And we're so excited today because we have a special kind of bonus episode where we are talking about, where we were talking with two of my fellow theater critics and the new president and vice president of Utah Theater Bloggers. And so it's going to be real fun. We have Maren Swensen here.
Hi.
And we have Scott Savage here.
Hey.
Yeah, thank you both for coming on. And Maren, why don't you explain kind of what has just happened here at Utah Theater Bloggers?
Yeah, so Russ Warren, who has been the president and was one of the founders of Utah Theater Bloggers because of some life situations, is stepping down, and we are all very sad because he's been my mentor ever since I joined in 2011. And so there was, a board meeting and some switching of things, and I have been placed in as the president of Utah Theater Bloggers, which is just here we are. And I was vice president and have been vice president for several years now. And so Scott has graciously stepped in to become vice president, which I'm super grateful for. And he has hit the ground running. But yeah, this is just Russ and another gentleman named Dave started this blog in 2010 as just seeing kind of the writing on the wall. Newspaper critics and things like that were already starting to go away, and even more so now. And so they just said, we need to have theater criticism continue on. And so they just started this. And so now we're 14 years later, and here we are still going, and it's fantastic. And so Russ wanted to just make sure that we continued on. And so here we are.
Well, Scott, congratulations. And also, why do you think having regional criticism in theater, you are a theater producer in your own career. Why do you think that's important that we have this?
I think all boats rise with the tide. I think that the more we get to talk about the theater that's happening, the more we do those kinds of things, you get to have the opportunity to see what is out there. I've lived in Utah for about half my life, and I've made theater or studied theater for a lot of that time. And being with UTBA has given me the best window into what kinds of theater is out there. And I think that we miss that a lot of the time. I think that you miss good things that are happening, trends that are happening in terms of what shows are popular, what things are out there. And I also think that seeing theater makes me a better theater maker as well. I think that most people need, that would be like saying, well, I write books, I just don't read. Well, okay, that's fine. But if you're not getting the input, if you're not looking at it and seeing what things impact you positively or negatively, you're missing the things that make you a better theater maker. And I think that having criticism gives you a lens into what kinds of things you should be looking out for, what kinds of things make your craft better.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I sometimes look forward to small regional productions and companies more than the equity, certainly than the national, the touring, companies coming through, things like that. They just announced, Lehigh Arts Council just announced their casting for Daddy Longlegs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But how much I love that show, and I love both of the people that they cast, and they're a married couple, and I am just thrilled. It's my most anticipated of the whole year, and that's because learning about these smaller companies, it's so exciting.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah, I agree. Well, before we dive into our main topic, I thought it would be helpful, especially with you, your presence, Maren, as a therapist, to talk a little bit about. There's been a bit of news the last couple of weeks of people talking about theater and trigger warnings, and it was started out with Rafe Fiennes, who gave this interview where he was saying that theater should trigger you. It should shock you. It should those kinds of things. And then Matt Smith, he was asked about it, and it's all over in the UK. And he says, I agree. I watched the interview. I agree with Rafe utterly and completely. That's why we go to the theater, isn't it? To be shocked, to be arrested out of ourselves, to recognize ourselves in front and with an audience. So he does say, I also agree that if there are strobes or whatever, there are some things, warnings make sense. So he does have some caveat. But I guess my feeling about this is that I actually think that in some ways, what we have determined as trigger warnings are actually helping. The people are so worried about people being offended, right? And you're going to be creating all these Karens and stuff like that. But my response is, I actually think you have less of a chance of creating a Karen, being offended, if you have some idea of the type of experience that you're signing up for. I don't think that we should spoil everything and be like, there's going to be this experience happening at this time or whatever, but a general mental health advisory so that you have some idea, so you can prepare mentally that, okay, I'm going to have this experience. I don't think that is a bad thing. And I think it's actually helpful to have a prepared audience that's ready for the experience that you're going to give them. I don't know, Scott, do you have any thought about that?
Yeah, I think that it's unethical to do something that could be physically harmful, like strobe lights, haze, things like that, without giving some kind of warning. And I think that the other side of that coin is taking a step back and saying, I don't think the intent of the theater is to shock. I think the intent of the theater is to entertain first. And sometimes the entertainment comes from shock value. I think there's a book that I used when I was co-teaching a directing class for undergrads from Scott Shattuck and Louis Catrone that talks about how the first goal of being a theater maker is to entertain. There has to be some value in what you're seeing and what you're engaging with. And then from there, yeah, if you want to make a political statement like Brecht, or if you want to shock or surprise, that's fine. But you have to give people the heads up. Even if you're going to shock and surprise, just say, we're not going to tell you anything about this, right? Yeah. Like Pixar used to be really good about that with movies that they would release, where you'd see like a 2-second, like sitting there doing nothing trailer, or a car driving past, and we're like, oh, now we're going to go see Cars. But Pixar had already established what their brand was. And once your brand is established, if you're a theater or a venue or an artist that says, this is the kind of theater I make, that's great. But
that's a good point. Yeah.
But once for you to say, no, I should be able to do whatever I want to you once you paid to be in my presence without giving you any heads up on that, I don't think we necessarily need a theater rating system like you have the MPAA, but having a heads up of what I'm going to go in and see, yeah, I think that we need that.
Yeah. What do you think, Maren, about this?
So when you sent the little message saying that we would talk about this, I was like, oh, this is a whole episode, and I could go on for hours. Sure. As a theater artist, creator, a therapist. Yes, I am a therapist as my day job. I'm also actively studying to be a registered creative arts therapist and a registered drama therapist. And so while, yes, theater is there to entertain, I do think theater is there for healing and education and so many other things that we bring theater into. So I have lots of feelings. And I was thinking about, how do I be concise in these feelings? And so I just have a couple of points that I'll try and be quick with it.
Sure.
When I say that theater is healing. So I went and I saw 9 to 5 this weekend. And that's, a fun show that's based on, the movie of the same name and whatever else. But one of the songs that is in it's the 11 o'clock number, is called Get Out and Stay Out. And it is, as a woman who is divorced and had a very negative situation for many years of my life, that song is healing. That song is a very healing, especially when it's done right. It is a very healing and emotional thing. And so that theater has the power to do that. I recently had a friend reach out to me. She and her family are going to New York soon, and she wanted to know about appropriate shows that she and her family could go to. And so, we're talking through some of that and whatever else. And it's interesting how different people react to, because one of my first questions is always, well, what is appropriate for your family?
Yeah.
I need to know that, because that's all very, very subjective. And so when I get certain questions from certain people, it's like, what are you saying when you say, should we have trigger warnings? Or what are you saying with some kinds of things? Because if you're saying certain art shouldn't be created, then I take a step back and say, no, we can create whatever we want to create. But I do think that some of it has to do with you as the audience member. I get this conversation a lot with surrounding something like, say, Six. People are like, well, why did we have to add this and that, or this sexual innuendo or anything like that in Six? Well, to be honest with you, if you want to look at the history of Henry VIII,
Right.
he killed one of his wives so he could marry another one. He changed the entirety of the church. If you don't understand that history and you think you're just going to a fun musical, I mean, that's on you.
Yeah.
That's on you that you didn't expect that level of sexual innuendo, because it's in the history.
Yeah.
So I feel like we should, as audience members, prepare ourselves that sometimes theater is shocking. It is not all just, comfortable bells and whistles. And I do find that sometimes people just expect that it's all going to be, comfortable Lion King.
Yeah.
And it's
and maybe that's the tricky part, is where do you draw the line of because you're right, everybody has different triggers. So what do you sit there all day like listing them all off?
Right.
But I mean, I think it's appropriate for something like the Kite Runner musical. I mean, not musical, play. That when that's a story that has child rape as an aspect of the story.
Right.
And it just seems like it helps everybody be more ready for the whole experience and more prepared. But I guess now that you say, I can see how it could also be this like slippery slope of like, where do you draw the line?
And also the Kite Runner is based on a book, a very well-known book.
Yeah.
And so it's you can look that up. You can look up the synopsis of the book and know what it's about.
Yeah.
And so we can look into this. And so this conversation that I had with my friend, good on her.
Yeah.
For before she's spending the money with her family to reach out to someone who knows and say what would be appropriate. And then she and I can have that conversation. Well, now tell me what your levels are, and then I can tell you, instead of just spending the money and then being offended. So should we have some trigger warnings? Absolutely. We should, as people. I think it should be okay. And then you should also know your audience. I think that a lot of the theaters around here in Utah, because we are a more conservative place, have more trigger warnings than you're going to see in New York.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's okay, because we know our audience and we want to make money.
Yeah, that's true. That can be very frustrating. Like at a theater, they were doing The Wedding Singer. And before the show started, they had this whole thing about like, this has a mature content, blah, blah, blah. And then I was just like, during intermission, there were people behind me that were like, I can't believe they had that in there. I was just like, what? They told you. Like, what else could they possibly do? It was literally on the website. It was on the, like everywhere that this had, like, and it's, I mean, come on.
Yeah. And so again, I do think it comes down to the audience. Like, if you go to theater solely to be entertained, then you need to seek out shows that entertain you. I do sometimes want to just go to theater to be entertained, but I also want to go to theater to think. I want to go to theater to heal. I want to go to theater for all these different things. And so I will seek out different things. I like sometimes to be shocked and whatever. That's what I'm looking for. I want that content to continue.
Right.
But I will not suggest those kinds of shows to people who aren't comfortable in that.
Yeah.
So, but I do think it's on you to look for that.
Yeah.
And I think in that vein, we have the benefit of being people whose theater's already a big part of our lives. But we're also talking about a field where there are theaters across the country closing their doors. And I think part of that, even in the American Theater Magazine article that talked about it last summer, part of it is that we're not necessarily in touch with who our audiences are, and we're not growing and building our audiences. And part of that is adjusting our expectations. Instead of saying, well, you should have come here and expected to be shocked. Okay, great. But if that's not what our audiences want, then we adapt or die. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that that's where we take a step back and say, what are our broader general audiences want? How are we listening? Yes, to the base of people who go and see theater for all the reasons that we go and see it. You know, I see more shows a year than anyone that's not a reviewer that I know, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And but if you're only going to see 2 or 3 shows a year, and then you go and see something and just go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that was going to be there, or this really is upsetting because of something I'm going through recently. Even a very beautiful show like I've seen, I saw Every Brilliant Thing last week, but there are things in there where, you know, if that's the only thing that they've seen, and even if they look it up and they're like, oh, it's positive, it's very affirming, it's this and that, even with the things that I had said, I know that there are people that I know who, if they saw it, would go, yeah, no, not for me, not at this moment in my life, not right now. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to create oodles and oodles of work to say, we have, you know, it's not like IMDb. We're not creating a parent's advisory guide where it's this many F-bombs and this many this and this many that. But being able to have an awareness that we're still trying to post-pandemic rebuild our audiences and engage new young audiences and listen to what theater does as part of a community. I think that giving the broader voice of people who don't attend as often, but we can encourage them to attend more often. I think that's where you start asking questions of, what are we telling them to encourage them? Hey, come be part of the art we're making.
Yeah. And I think it's a mistake to like just fear this thing of people being offended. I think the for the most part, people that are, you know, going to see theater are pretty like interested and creative. And, you know, like, I think that it's more about, are they prepared? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how can we prepare them? Yeah. Whether it's a trigger warning or whether it's just like you said, like saying, oh, here's this book, there's this, you know, it's letting them know what it's about, that what it's based on, what it's, you know, all that stuff, just trying to prepare people. And I think that critics and reviews can be very helpful in that regard. And that and just are also, you know, post on social media, all that stuff can hopefully help make people prepared for the experiences that they're having. So,
and I think it's like some people saying I don't like to read. Well, you probably do, right? You read text messages or you read things that you come across, but you have to find what it is that you're interested in. People say, oh, I don't like theater. No, you do. There's something there for you. We just have to help you find it. And I think that's where our role as critics comes in.
Yeah. And a final example of all this, because I think a theater company here in Utah that does this really well, and one who puts out sometimes content that here in Utah can be offensive, is the Ziegfeld Theater in Ogden. Because one of the things that they'll do every time when you go and see them and they announce what's coming up and whatever else, they'll say, this show, leave the kids home. This is, you know, they go out of their way to make sure that we know, hey, this one is not for the kids. This one is for this one's family friendly or whatever else, because they know their audience. And so they're trying to make sure that we're aware. And I think that more than trigger warning is important. Like, no, you know, like Mary Poppins. Yeah, let's come. Everyone come. But Rent, maybe not so much. Yeah. But not saying don't do it. Just saying be aware of what's appropriate.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, we have a big topic that we are talking about today. Today, we're talking about 5 favorite Broadway shows. Could be musical, not musical. And so it's going to be fun, very challenging. And I posted on our Utah Theater Lovers group, and I got 51 responses. It's by far the most responses I've ever gotten to anything I've posted on there. So there's a lot of interest in this topic. It's going to be fun. I'll read as many of those as I can. Yeah, it's always, people love making lists. I'm a list maker, so I get it. I understand, and it's gonna be a blast. But before we dive in, do either of you have any honorable mentions that couldn't make your five that you want to talk
So
about?
many honorable mentions. Like, this was the hardest thing, Rachel. I talked to my best friends about this, my people that I always travel to New York with,
Yeah.
my husband, my kids. Like, I was like, this is horrible. How dare she make me come up with this? Like, yeah, like there were so many, like I was hemming and hawing about, like, yeah, like I have so many,
Yeah.
but I'm like still heartbroken that Les Mis didn't make my list, because I feel like it should have. It was like my gateway drug into musical theater.
Yeah.
But it didn't. And then like Sweeney Todd didn't make my list, and that makes me feel bad about myself because it should have. But yeah, I mean, so many.
Yeah.
And Secret Garden was like something that I love so much. I'm going to see it this week actually. And I love it. I like, it was like, it was my show as a seventh grader. I would sit in my best friend's basement and we would listen to it, but it didn't make my list. So many.
Some good honorable mentions. What about you, Scott? Do you have any honorable mentions?
I mean, I'm going to use my cheat code here, which is my MFA program studied theater for young audiences. And there are a lot of incredible theater for young audiences shows that have never made it to Broadway. The fact that Frog and Toad did is incredible, but there are incredible straight plays by people like Jose Cruz Gonzalez, Susan Zeder, that are Broadway caliber scripts and shows that haven't made it to Broadway. And so in the caveat of only Broadway shows, that's my number one. And I would cheat a little bit by adding Frog and Toad specifically to my list, because my five are going to be kind of this is a smattering, with one exception, which is my number one right now. These are like shows that are emblematic of the things that I love on Broadway. And yeah, trying to narrow it down, like Maren said, was incredible.
It was very hard. Well, my two honorable mentions, of course, there were many that I loved and I thought about, but the two big ones that didn't make my five is, I just saw it, so it was just too recency biased to make the top five, but Tick, Tick, Boom, I absolutely just love that show. I love the message of a creator, and the frustrations of a creator and what it feels like to create something and try to get people to love it. And you feel like you're giving something to people, but they don't want to receive it. And that's very frustrating. And I just connect so much, and I love the songs, but I've only seen it the one time. Of course, I've seen the movie many times, but I love that show. And it was just such a treat to get to see it this last month. And then the other one that didn't make my list, even though I think it's probably the show I've seen the most, and I've reviewed it tons for UTBA, it's The Music Man. And I love music. The songs, with a few exceptions, there's a couple not good ones, but for the most part, the songs are amazing. And I love the story of redemption and love. And I has a special place in my heart because I took a trip to New York in 2000 with my grandma and my cousin. And we went and saw the Rockettes Christmas Spectacular, and that's my grandma's. It was her like favorite thing in the whole world is the Rockettes, and that's how we got her to go. We were like, Grandma, we'll go, see the Rockettes, and okay, let's go. And we saw the Rebecca Luker, Craig Bierko revival of The Music Man, and then we also saw Beauty and the Beast, which also I'm very nostalgic for. Would be an honorable mention. I just now they both passed, my cousin and my grandma, so it's just a very like special. My sister played Marion in her high school production, so I saw her in that, and it just has a lot of milestones kind of for me in my life. But it didn't make my top five, but those are my two big honorable mentions. But why don't you start us off, Maren, with your number five? Or they don't necessarily have to be in order, 1 to 5.
I don't numbers, but I'll start off with the one that actually like I sat here feeling like, am I allowed to say this one because of your feelings about it, Rachel? And I went back and forth whether or not this one made the top five. But and I considered, because my husband and I, we narrowed it down to like, okay, well, what, and some of my friends, the composers and everything else, but it came back over and over again to Into the Woods. And I know your feelings. And so
It's all right, it's good.
The reason why I wanted to, there's a couple of different reasons. I do love Sondheim. I love so many of different of Sondheim's shows and whatever. And a lot of what we love in theater has to do with what we grew up with.
Yeah.
And I was 8 or 9 years old when Into the Woods came out on Broadway. And so it was again a gateway drug show, and something that I just fell in love with. But I had it pulled up and it looks like my phone refreshed, so I didn't have it. There was a particular review that I did of a production of Into the Woods that really explains why I love Into the Woods so much. And it was Ogden Musical Theater's version of Into the Woods that they did in 2021. And the director had said that she saw the way that they did this in a production in New York. And something that really matters to me when we revive shows, because I, I get a lot of people who say things like, well, why revive a classic, where I do this, why change, blah, blah, blah. But that's what theater is.
Yeah.
Is redoing things. We redo Shakespeare all the time. It is what it is. So in this production, the narrator is a child. And I had never seen that before. I was like, what? It's a child? How's that going to work? And at first you start thinking like, well, the old man, blah, 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 blah. And then I had to sit back and take a deep breath and say, okay, Maren, go with the director's concept.
Yeah.
See what you can do. And in my review at the end, and I left the building sobbing. And I'll tell you why in a second. But I went out and I started writing my review in my car because I'd never been so impacted. And I said, when you can take a show like this, that you know every word and you know everything about it, and you can feel like you've seen it for the first time, that is a show that has staying power. That is a show that's a classic. And that's how I felt seeing Into the Woods again. And again, I know everything about Into the Woods, and I felt like I saw it for the first time. And it is because I didn't totally understand until the very end, when the baker's wife comes at the end and says, and I'm getting teary right now, and she says, tell him the story of how it all happened. Be father and mother, you'll know what to do. And then he says, alone. And then she says, sometimes people leave you halfway through the wood. And then all the other characters start coming back out, and the father follows the narrator as he looks at all the characters, and you realize it's the son. The entire time that narrator had been the son, and he had been hearing the story from his dad. And it started the show out with him opening the book and saying, once upon a time. And then the very end of the show, careful of the things you say, children will listen. And the whole time you realize that the child had been listening the entire time and hearing that story. And as a mom and a children's therapist, that's why I love that show. That's why I love being a theater critic. That's why I love the ability to revive shows. It was one of the most beautiful things I ever have seen in my whole life. And that's why Into the Woods made my top 5.
I love that. I love hearing that. That's so cool when you have that kind of transcendent experience. Well, Scott, what is your number 5?
For me, it's Next to Normal. Also, Maren, I feel the same way about Into the Woods as Rachel up until listening to you say that. And now I just went, okay, I probably need to go watch it again and think about this more closely.
Me too.
Changed my mind. I love Next to Normal. I know that there are lots of people who have complicated feelings about it, but for me, it was the first time that I had engaged with a musical that made me realize that there are musicals that talk about things that don't get talked about. And just the timing in my life when it came out, right? Like it was something that, it's not a perfect show, but I love that you can look at each of the characters in that show and go, these people made choices that created these problems, but they all were doing the best they could with the information that they had in front of them. And there's powerful music, and I love the rock opera style. I love the, I don't know. I love that I've seen it twice, and both times, once at UVU about 10 years ago, and once last summer at the Liahona Academy. And both times when intermission came up, the audience just sat silently for a while and had nothing to say. and the first time I saw it, I was with my parents and my siblings, and we are chatty people, and we just sat there, and no one got up to move, no one got up to get a drink, and you just went, okay, man, that's hard. And it's powerful in a lot of good ways, but that's what it does for me, is that feeling of, this is different than what I'd had theater experiences before up to that point.
Yeah, I saw it in Midvale. They used to have a little theater there, and it was, you walk out and you're just like, wow, I just had an just unbelievable experience. That I agree, that one's special. Well, for me,
I actually assign people to listen to it sometimes. It's so moving. So yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Well, my number 5 is the show that, at least recently, that I think I've seen the most. Maybe not more than Music Man, but I've seen it a lot of times, and I just love it every time I've seen it. It's actually Singing in the Rain is my number 5. Most musicals these days are based on movies, and this is, I think, my favorite of any musical. This or Hairspray. That would also be a strong honorable mention, is Hairspray. I do love that. And this, I think it's so like whimsical and so charming, and the dancing is so incredible. And I mean, getting to see Singing in the Rain with the actual rain effects. I know it's challenging for companies to do, but every time I've seen it, it never fails to enchant me. It is, in my opinion, the best thing that Hale Theater has ever done was their production of Singing in the Rain. I saw it 3 times, which their tickets are expensive, so that's saying a lot. I was blown away by it, the spectacle of it, the heart of it, the dancing, the singing. I've seen it, I think, 9 times. I love it. I love the dancing. I love the singing. I love the story. It's funny. It's sweet. It's romantic. And I think it's very underrated as far as, like, I mean, I don't think it ever got any like critical praise in the theater community, but it's done a lot here in Utah. And I just think it's such a good adaptation of that movie. The couple added songs I think are really fun, and it has basically every song from the movie. They even do the Broadway ballet, and that's enjoyable. So I really do love Singing in the Rain. What I was thinking when I was really thinking of these 5, I was like, which one would I drive an hour to see? What's a show that if I knew they were doing it in Logan, let's just say I live in Draper, which would I be tempted to drive to Logan to see? Because I love it so much. And Singing in the Rain, I did actually drive to Logan to see it. When the musical Theater West did it.
Criteria.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people who live in other states don't understand how far we drive for theaters. So
yeah, they did it at Musical Theater West. And so that's my number 5. Maren, what do you have at 4?
This is another one where I feel like, I'm so basic. But I moved to New York City after I graduated from college because I had no life plan. And I moved to New York City in December of 2003. And if anyone understands anything about musical theater history and what was happening in the fall of 2003, I would go after work and stand in the lottery for Wicked all the time. And I worked for nonprofit. My first master's degree is in disability studies. I I loved the character of Nessa Rose, and then I'm just through a couple of different things. I actually got to meet the original Nessa Rose, and then I got to start taking people, because wheelchair accessible seating in New York, they treat people fantastic. So it actually ended up cheaper for me to take one of my clients and myself than to buy a ticket on my own.
Oh.
I have seen Wicked on Broadway more than any other show, and the number is actually kind of atrocious.
I want to know.
If you count having seen it in London and whatever, my total number of times seeing Wicked is 28 times.
Nice.
So great.
I know.
I've only seen it once, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
Feel like it has everything. I feel like it has spectacle. I feel like it has fantastic tech elements. I feel like the story is beautiful. I feel like the music. I love Stephen Schwartz. I love him as an author. I've loved him since Prince of Egypt. Like, I just love him. But I love Pippin. I love all of the things. So again, it was like I was thinking about all of the different, like, who do I love as composers? But Wicked just, I mean, and I had moved to New York because I felt like just a failure as a Utah girl. I was 24 and not married or whatever. You know, like, it was just like, what am I supposed to do with my life? I guess I'll move to New York City. So like, I just was, it and is still to this day, just like, I love everything about it. And now that makes me a basic girly, like, but I love everything about Wicked.
Well, Scott, what about you? What's your number 4?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit because this is opening on Broadway this year, but it's a script that I studied when I was in grad school, and it's a story that I love, and it is Mary Jane by Amy Herzog. Are you familiar?
I feel like I've heard.
I've been reading about it. I want to see it.
Yeah. So it's about a mom who has a disabled child that's on effectively hospice care, and how she grapples with that. And it is, I'm going to leave it there, but it is a straight play. It's not a musical, and it's phenomenal. The first time I read it as a script without seeing it on stage, I just sobbed. I was just so sad. Oh, and it was, and it's so powerful. The first time I remember as a parent being impacted by art was actually watching The Incredibles, and there's the airplane scene where, you know, she's on and she's like, there, you know, we have children aboard the aircraft, and my son is, you know, I'm sitting and doing homework, and my son is laying on the floor watching this movie. And that was the first time I was impacted directly by art through my connection to being a parent. And this play so deeply reminds me of that, and the challenges of being a caregiver and of taking care of someone that can't take care of themselves, and doing that in, you know, I don't know. It's a good one. It's really good. I've never been to New York.
That's good.
I would love to go to New York and see that.
It's funny. In the post I did in Utah Theater Lovers, the one of the comments is, I love how there are just a handful of people that listed a dialogue play. We're definitely a Utah group. So I'm glad that you are representing straight plays. That's very good. Very good. Okay. So my number 4 is another one that I've driven the Logan to see. It is She Loves Me. I will see it anywhere that is being put on. I will go anywhere that
I have to jump in to say, Rachel, you know, my youngest daughter's name is Amalia.
So I thought maybe this might be on your list. I don't know, but
no, it's not. But I mean, I do love it. My daughter's name is Amalia, so I do love that show.
It is a perfect show. The songs are absolutely wonderful. The story is so tight and charming and wonderful, and it just, the perfumery story just works. In any, whether You've Got Mail, whether it's Shop Around the Corner, whether it's She Loves Me, the pro shot with Zachary Levi and Larmanite is totally wonderful. And the idea of people falling in love with each other over their words is just an appealing concept. They hate each other in real life, but they've fallen in love with each other over their words. That's a wonderful idea for a story. So it just works. And I mean, this is like a Hallmark movie in theater form, which is probably why I love it so much. But I really do love the songs. Ice Cream, One of the first times that I saw it was actually at the Pleasant Grove Players, which is one of those small gym theaters that's in the Pleasant Grove Library of all places. Tiny little theater. Their productions are so good. And they did She Loves Me and had married couple playing the leads. So it was so fun. And their chemistry was great. I just, it is just a perfect show. I literally wouldn't change anything about it as far as the book and music and everything. So, all right, Maren, what's your number 3?
Okay, so really, when it came down to it, everything has a history. Everything has some reason why it matters so much to me, because I love theater so much, and I've seen so many. Some friends and I were talking about how many shows in general or have I seen or whatever else, and it's got to be in the thousands. And I feel like I'm theater blessed, and I can't. So it's like, this was so hard, but again, I gotta not cry. I was a Mormon missionary in Washington, D.C. on September 11th, 2001.
Oh, wow.
And Come From Away is a perfect show.
Yeah.
From start to finish. But the emotions that it opens for me also. Everything.
I can't wait to get to see it eventually. I've just seen the pro shot.
Yeah.
But I haven't had a chance to actually see it.
I saw it in New York, and I saw it about 3 or 4 times when it was here last time.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's perfect. It is perfect. The ensemble, the history of the Tonys is that we used to have an ensemble award and we don't anymore. And it is tragic that we couldn't give an ensemble award for Come From Away. It is perfect. It is beautiful. I have a friend from Newfoundland, and they literally will say all the time, "Have you been to New York? Have you seen the show?" You know, when I saw it in New York, I was by myself and sobbing. And afterwards, this lady turns to me, who I don't know, and she says, "I was in Newfoundland once. I went to go get gas, and the people at the gas station invited me for dinner, and I went and had dinner at their house. This is exactly what it's like." I mean, I have a daughter who is very like anti-religious for lots of reasons or whatever else, but she'll tell me that anytime anyone asks me what my favorite scripture is, I tell them Philippians 4:6, be anxious for nothing. Like, just, and my younger daughter, who's a drummer, is like always saying one of the best drum songs in the world is the beginning of Come From Away and the drums start and whatever. It just, I could go on forever. It's a perfect show, and a perfect for those of us who are living right next to what happened. And I do even love so much how they even include how hard it was for Muslims. Because as I spent 10 years of my career working specifically with the refugee population in the United States, so many people will say, "Oh, we were so united after 9/11, but we weren't 100%. And I appreciate how Come From Away even includes that. It's a perfect show. And it
is masterful at balancing tone. I mean, that is so hard to do. You know, that show could feel so heavy, but it never does. But it's not like they're making light of it at all. It just feels real and authentic. Yeah, that's a great pick. Scott, what do you have at 3?
I have, and this is where I start getting into one show that is emblematic of a lot of shows. So I'm going to pick Cinderella, which is kind of cheating, but that is my stand-in for Broadway Disney musicals.
The Roger Hammerstein.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Enchanted Edition is phenomenal. I wanted to do it with my students this year. The rights were prohibitive for my Title I school to do, but that's a conversation for another day. But I love the story so much. In the vein of perfect shows, right? It is I have this conversation with my students where they're like, I ask, what does Cinderella want? And they're like, well, she wants to fall in love. And I went, no, she wants to be free. She wants to have her independence again. And she wants to have what she had before. She was loved. She was taken care of. She is not looking for the next ticket out of here, no matter what it is. She's not Jack going to Santa Fe. She is looking for the opportunity to connect. And I love that she uses her mother's dress. And I love that, that the Cinderella story is everywhere in every culture in the world. And it is beautiful and wonderful and magical. And I loved that version of it. I I love that I teach a really diverse population of students, and then got to show them the version with Brandy to go, you know, that Cinderella is not necessarily blonde, right? I understand that the Disney animated film is that way.
That version with Brandy is like, well, my
I
child
love
loves
that
it
version.
so much.
Yeah.
So good. And it's
So good.
It's so good. All of the characters in that version of the story are rich and meaningful and have clear objectives and have the things that you want to have in a theater maker.
My number 3 is a show I mentioned earlier, but I think it's also a perfect show, is Daddy Longlegs is my number 3. I will go anywhere that's doing it. I would drive to Logan if they were doing it.
This year to see, because I've never seen it.
I absolutely love this show. I love the way that it builds the romantic tension between the two characters. I think that, I mean, it only has 2 characters on stage the whole time, and their chemistry, and I saw it 3 times with the same cast, which is sort of unusual, because the first time that I saw it was at Hale Center Theater Orem, and it was Kelly Coombs and Dave Smith, who I try to see everything Dave Smith does because he was a former teacher of mine. I just think he's great, and I absolutely just loved it. I loved the romance, I loved the story, I loved the songs, loved it. And then they did it for their Hale at Home when there was the pandemic, and so I saw them doing it, and then, which was such a like great thing during the pandemic because I was so theater, starved, and to see this show that I love with these actors that I love, that was very special. And then at Hale Sandy, they, after the pandemic, they did it again. So I've seen these same actors 3 times, but then I've seen it other places as well. And there's also a pro shot on Broadway HD. So you could watch that if you want, Maren, if you didn't get a chance to see it. It is on it's fun because Megan McGinnis and I forget her husband's name, but the 2 leads, two leads are married in real life.
Okay.
They have super great chemistry. It's really fun.
Broadway HD, so
you should watch it. It's really good. And I just absolutely love the story. It's very romantic. It's the song, like I said, the songs are wonderful. And I think they've taken don't judge it by the Fred Astaire movie. Don't judge it by that, because that he's so much older, and in this one they smartly, she just thinks that he's older, but she's not actually older. So anyway, I just adore the show, so that's my number 3. So Maren, what's your number 2?
So my sister is a high school theater teacher, and when I graduated from high school in 1997, both in 1997 and 1998, I got to go with her and her students to New York. And those were my first couple of trips to New York. And again, people who understand musical theater history know what was happening there. And I was theater blessed beyond all measure to see Ragtime. And again, when we talk about perfect shows and perfect everything, and me being a lover of history and humanity, and also being a multicultural diversity professor, and everything that's wrapped up in my life, when you talk about would you drive an hour to see it, I mean, I drove 4 hours to see it when they did it at Shakespeare Festival. I drove up to Musical Theater West, which is one of the best productions of Ragtime I've ever seen. I would drive anywhere. They just announced that the special concert that they did of it with the original cast, sans Maren Maisie, because she did pass away. They're putting it in movie theaters next month, March 13th and March 17th, as a Fandango special, and you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be there. The song at the end of the first act, Till We Reach That Day, is the most moving thing, and I just, like, every ounce of me loves every ounce of that show.
I can't even believe sometimes that show got made, because it is so ambitious. The cast is so large, the songs are so difficult, that you watch it and you're like, wow, they had guts to put this on.
And think of the stars that we have from that show.
Yeah.
Brian Stokes Mitchell, Audra
True.
McDonald. Like Leah Michelle was actually the little girl in the original cast of
really?
that show. Like
Oh,
we have so many stars. Maren Maisie, all of those people came
true.
from the original Ragtime. It just
Yeah. What about you, Scott? What's your number 3?
Number 2.
So my number 2 is...
Oh, 2, sorry.
No, you're good. So this is my hashtag nostalgia. And so I thought very seriously about Wicked. And I'm glad that Maren took it because that gives me the flexibility to do others. But in high school, you know, I would listen to a lot of musicals on repeat. I would listen to Phantom. I would listen to Wicked. I would listen to Aida and Jekyll and Hyde. And for me, these were my high school theater kid era, right? For all the Swifties out there. That was what I was listening to all the time. And these were the shows that I was being introduced to. I was in Once on This Island and I got to direct it, and that all kind of fits.
Quoted Once on This Island in my dissertation.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely underrated.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And Joseph as well. In fact, the first play that I was ever taken to see was the national tour of Joseph when I was in 6, and we lived in Chicago or in the surrounding area, and I saw Donny Osmond. But this is where I have to do Les Miserables. It connects to me personally. It connects to me with my family. I remember going on long car trips, and my dad would play the songs and explain what was happening and talking about it. And this is the musical that for me was so eye-opening. This year, East High School did it, and I took all of our 6th graders to go see it. And they skipped Lovely Ladies, and you know they shortened a couple of things for time, but they did a really, really beautiful job of it. And I am never not emotionally affected by it. I think about, I feel like at different times in my life, I've connected with each of these characters. And I think that, you know, you see the humanity and again, the complicated lives and how you start thinking about, okay, what do I really value here? And what is true? And what are we really aiming for? And it's good. I can't imagine understanding and appreciating theater the way that I do without this show. You know, you see memes sometimes that are like, oh, well, it's too bad Shakespeare didn't live in our day to see, you know, this episode of The Simpsons or whatever. But truly, I can't imagine how it would have impacted Shakespeare to see Les Miserables. It is that good.
100%. Yep.
Well, my number 2 is another show I've seen many, many, many times, and I just love it more every time I see it. It's Bright Star is my number 2. I absolutely love the story. I love the music. I love everything about it. I think it's moving. It's a beautiful story of love, of hope. I don't know. I think it's definitely very underrated outside of Utah. We have this little bubble where we love it, but I don't think other places love it as much as we do. But I've seen it, I think 9 times, and I still love it. Like it hasn't. I only love it more every time I see it, and I just think the message is beautiful: family, forgiveness, hope, and so yeah, it has to be. I mean, sometimes I wonder, is it actually my favorite show? It might be, but it doesn't have the nostalgia of my number 1. But yeah, I just think it's really special. Yeah. So, all right, Maren, what's your number 1?
I have a sneaking suspicion that Scott and I might have the same number 1. But we'll see.
Possible.
But I got to be in New York the week before the world shut down for the pandemic, and one of the very last shows I saw on Broadway. And I sometimes think that, am I theater saturated? Have I lost the ability to be completely and totally surprised and taken away and shocked and in the beauty and awe and everything? And then I saw Hadestown. And I just everything. It was literally, I told people afterwards, it was the best thing I'd seen in decades. I had just not been taken, my breath hadn't been taken away like that. The story, the music, the set design, the lighting, every single everything, the trombone player, just like every ounce of me was wrapped up in that show. And I cannot tell you, I had not felt like that since Wicked. I had not felt like that since Ragtime. I had not felt like that. And then I've seen it on Broadway twice. I've seen it on tour a couple of times. Each time I just lean back into it and just feel like every time I listen to the music, every time there's nothing like it. I've never felt like that. And it just reminds me of why I love this art.
Yeah, I mean, just the spectacle of it is really special. Yeah, I can see why. So Scott, did she steal your thunder?
It's impossible to steal Hadestown Thunder. It really is. But yes, that is also my number one. So in terms of would I drive an hour to see it? I drove in the middle of the week, left work early, drove 5 hours to Boise, and then drove 5 hours back that night to be back at work the next day. Yes, that is how much I wanted to see Hadestown. And I love it. My wife and I talk all the time about the fact that I'm like, I have a really great love story going on in my own life, but there is nothing artistically more beautiful to me than a sad love story, which is why titles like Aida and Wicked and even in Les Mis and and
Bright
Next
Star.
to Normal, all these things.
Bright Star, yeah.
No, you're good. They all speak to me on a deep level. But I love that it's circular. I love that it's written to just keep going forever, and that there's this optimism in it that when I was little, my dad would always say, we'd watch Pollyanna and he'd go, "Oh, I don't think she's going to fall out of the tree this time." And we're like, "Yes, she is, Dad. It's a movie. That's how movies work." And there's that Pollyanna effect to Hadestown where you just go, maybe this time doubt will creep in, but he won't look back. And the iconic moment for me in it is when he turns at the end and they just say, it's you, and you just see the doors close down on her. And you're just like, no, why? Every time. And it doesn't matter. I mean, there's so many beautiful, like, I love Hades producing the flower from his hand. I love all of the things that happen in the show.
When I saw it on Broadway, someone gasped. And it's like, you don't know the story. But yeah, it's like they've done it so well that even though you know the story, you gasp.
Yeah. Yep. It was so good.
I enjoyed
so good.
Hadestown. I was a little tired the day I saw it, so I really need to see it again. Because
and again.
Yeah. I need to see it fully rested. I think to 100% like have that transcendent experience. But I did enjoy it when I got to see it. So, well, my number one, I don't know if anything can top ever Les Mis because it was so fundamental to not only my understanding and love for musical theater, but my just love of music, my love of media of any kind. It was my obsession in high school. I literally knew every line to every song. I'd watched that 10th anniversary concert over and over and over again. And I love that so much.
My other daughter's name is Leia, Leia Salonga.
Oh, that's so fun.
She is Filipino, so my daughters are half Filipino, so yeah.
And something like On My Own, just the fact that the way that she sang it was so revolutionary to me. It was introduced me to Belt, introduced me to that style of forceful singing, and Bring Him Home. There's so many amazing songs, and the whole message of forgiveness and mercy, and the most noble villain of any villain. Like he thinks that he's doing what's right. He thinks he's fighting for justice. He thinks and so Javert's story is actually pretty moving, and it's just so wonderful. And I mean, if I had to nitpick, like I think because that songs are kind of lame, But other than that, I really love the show so much, and I will go see anywhere who does it. And it's really cool. It was such a kismet because when I just started going back to theater after quarantine, I waited the 2 weeks that we were supposed to wait at the time after I got vaccinated. And the first show that I saw was at Hale Center Theater and saw their Les Mis. And I just thought that was so amazing that would be a show that's so special to me. That would be the show that I would be my welcome back to the world of theater. So it was really cool. And it's one of those shows that even a bad production of Les Mis, like I even enjoy the movie, even though it's got lots of problems. Even a bad version of Les Mis, it's still Les Mis. So there we go. So I think it's good. So I asked in the Utah Theater Lovers Facebook group, and like I said, over 50 comments, unbelievable. But here's some of what people had to say. Drew Cannon says, The Book of Mormon, Legally Blonde, Cats, Come From Away, and Rent. Alicia Tsuki says, Phantom of the Opera, Rent, Sweeney Todd, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Cabaret. Marnie Dietz Crozer says, Wicked, Hamilton, Come From Away, The Lion King, and Mamma Mia. Mary Peterson says, Les Mis, Hamilton, Aida, Joseph, Maze Dreamcoat, Phantom of the Opera, and Evita. She says, sorry, I had to do 6. Shannon Herrera says, Rent, Secret Garden, Ragtime, Spring Awakening, and Next to Normal. Tara Blumberg Griffith says Les Mis, Waitress, Mamma Mia, Phantom, and Dear Evan Hansen. And Mary Lynn Child says Next to Normal, Come From Away, Once on This Island, Aida, and Sound of Music. Mindy B. Shock Haraldson says Fan of the Opera, Les Mis, Wicked, Fiddler on the Roof, and Joseph. Let's see if there's any other unique ones. Liz Morley says Sweeney Todd, Hamilton, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, Wicked, and Les Mis. Will Cohen says Hamilton, Something Rotten, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Part 1 and 2. Gutenberg and The Lifespan of a Fact. And let's see any other unique ones. Jason Sin says Dear Evan Hansen, Hadestown, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Rent, and Kinky Boots. Barbara Armstrong says To Kill a Mockingbird, Come From Away, Something Rotten, Passing Strange, and Intimate Appeal.
Harold.
Yeah. And Nancy Mawiney says Bright Star, Moulin Rouge, Dear Evan Hansen, Phantom, and the Scarlet Pimpernel. So there, like I said, there's over 50 responses. So I could go on and on, but a lot of interesting choices there and a lot of variety. A lot more Phantom than I expected.
Puffs was never on Broadway because I couldn't include Puffs.
This is about the best of theater, Scott.
I should have included In the Heights. I love In the Heights. When you say Hamilton, I'm like, yeah, Hamilton was awesome. I think
that's so funny because when I was talking about this with my family and everyone, that was one of the things that we said is like, are you going to list Hamilton? And I'm like, if I was going to list a Lin-Manuel property, I would list In the Heights 110%. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm with you, Scott.
Yeah. Well, there we go. We did it. Let us know what your top 5s would be. We'd love to get those in the comments section. And you can follow OnStage Blog on all the social medias. And Maren, where can people find you?
I'm just Maren Swensen on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And then on TikTok, I'm Doc Broadway. Great. And then, of course, Utah Theater Bloggers. Follow Utah Theater Bloggers. And
Scott, where can people find you?
Podcast TYA. We're going to get rolling again once my musical gets done in about 3 weeks. And that's Instagram and X and all the things. And yeah, other than that, Utah Theater Bloggers, read us, share us. And we're really lucky to be, with you on the OnStage Blog podcast. So.
And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes, and at rachelsreviewstheater.com and at UTBA. So you can find my reviews there. And thanks so much to both of you. This was really fun. And we'll talk to y'all later. Bye, everyone.